If you play an 82-game
you
schedule...
You haven't let me finish a point yet because you keep interrupting.
Anthony, if you play an 82-game schedule...
That doesn't mean that it's okay to interrupt if you just say my name. Michael.
Welcome back to Worst Seats in the House. Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta coming to you from Tree Rink on the morning of the Wild's second part of a home-and-home against the Chicago Blackhawks. Won last game 4-3 in overtime on Matt Zuccarello's 9th career overtime goal. Third this season, 5th in a Wild sweater. They were up 3-1 in the game. I thought it was actually a really good game, Anthony. I mean, I thought that the Blackhawks did a really good job on the Boldy Kaprizov and Yurov line. They didn't have a lot of room to operate, but a lot of depth scoring in that game. Johansson had a 3-point game, looked good on that third line. I thought McCarron was really good. I thought tone was set early, but obviously I'm sure that some fans maybe weren't satisfied, but I actually thought it was an entertaining game watching from afar in Florida.
Yeah, I thought the start was great. Mm-hmm. The intensity, the speed was high, and I think there was a significant overreaction to the 3-game losing streak because everybody looked at it and said, wow, it's 3 Eastern non-playoff teams. It's like if you don't beat them all 5-1, that it's an underachieving thing. If you looked at the Wild's games in those 3, even in the first periods where the feeling was that the team had started slow, they still had a 56% expected goals for in the first periods. Mm-hmm. The game got better as it went on. I think it was by period, it was like 56, 68, 80. But it isn't going to be 80 every night. And so the Wild lost 3 games, but for the most part, I think it was just pucks weren't going in. They hit a few posts. They weren't their best efforts of the season, but they weren't their worst. Mm-hmm. And so I thought the Chicago game was just a game where they did get rewarded for their start. They were terrific in the first period. They got rewarded for it, and they were ahead 3-1. Then I didn't think they played particularly well with the lead in the third period. And it had a little bit of a sit back, protect a lead feel to it. I thought Chicago started to bring some energy, but they found a way to win the game. And, that's what you have to do when you're in those kind of spots is the challenge for teams in the NHL is when you're in a rut, find a way to get into overtime and pick up a few points even when you're losing, and then put a stop to it as quickly as you can because everybody has them. And the Wild did that. The Johansson to Zuccarello play in overtime was great. The overtime I thought was terrific. Yeah. It was a wildly entertaining pace back and forth, chances back and forth. So it's a good win for the Wild against a Chicago club that's played him well all season.
I love how Quinn, in that overtime too, obviously, he just recognizes, he's tired, but he recognizes more so that Chicago's tired. So that one play where he sort of does the reset and you think he's going to leave the zone, but actually he goes a little deep. He decides to keep it in. He keeps Chicago pinned, and then he goes off for the change that led to the goal. I thought it was a really smart play.
Yeah, and it might also just be a guy who thinks we got a chance to win it here.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I don't know that.
But I think if he leaves the zone and does the change, then he's allowing Chicago to do the change.
Yeah, maybe. You could keep that possession without letting Chicago change.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of it.
Yeah.
Everybody does that well. It's a long change for Chicago. So
I just think he thinks the game differently. I was watching the clips of the podcast that he did with the Kachucks and his brother the other day, and just the way that he was even talking about the 3-on-3 system that he didn't love, which I was surprised he admitted in the Olympics, and how nervous he was about it. He's just such a smart hockey player. He sees the game differently than everybody.
Well, he does, and you might be right. I think we could be giving him a hair more credit for recognizing that Chicago was tired, therefore I don't want to leave the zone.
Right.
Because most guys recognizing they're tired will take the puck out of the zone, do a reset, make a change so you get fresh players on the ice when they can't.
Yeah.
I think he just was thinking, I got a chance to make a play. We've got the puck. I'll change when the other guys have the puck. And that way we keep things going. I think during the call, I even made mention of that it had the feel of the quarterfinal against Sweden where everybody else changes. He says, no, I'm good, stays on the ice and winds up with the winner. It had that kind of feel in Chicago, and it wound up, obviously, that the Wild won the game. You know what I thought was interesting, and I hadn't really thought about it prior to that, it's the first overtime winner the Wild have had this year where Kirill Kaprizov didn't figure in the scoring of the winning goal.
Yeah.
Not only was he on the ice for all 9 winners, he had either a goal or an assist on all 9.
Oh, wow. I had no idea. That's crazy. That is nuts. Yeah, you think about the play in Seattle, play in Buffalo.
But so now 10 overtime wins for the Wild this year, tied for the most in the NHL, and Kaprizov now is not perfect 90%. He's had a point in 9 of the 10.
That's actually a good little note for the insider that I'm going to steal from you.
That's right. That's what the Athletic does. Yeah.
The Blackhawks, I think they are going to be, like, first of all, that Crevier, my God, is he a monster? If he ever gets a mean bone in his body, he's going to be a menace. I thought Bedard is just continue to look really good. They're going to be, I think, a really good team. They are young.
They're young and they're coming, and they're going to have more draft picks in the system. But if you look at who they already have, with Levshunov, who was a 2 overall pick, Nazar, Oliver Moore, Bedard, these are all guys who were picked in the top 14 in the draft. And they're coming. There's no doubt about it. And I think even as early as next year, they might be a team that's pushing for a playoff spot. Yeah. It's going to be tough for them to make that next step in the Central Division. And Ryan Carter and I talked about a little bit on the air that they're in the spot that so many teams were chasing the Taves and Kane Blackhawks back in the 12 or 14 years ago, whereas teams were trying to build and kept talking about, hey, we're going to take the next step. We're going to take the next step. Well, big deal if you can't take a step that's big enough to catch Taves and Kane. And that's the spot they might be in when you start to look at Colorado, Dallas, Minnesota, even Utah in the Central Division. You could make significant improvements next year and still be the 5th best team in the Central.
Right.
And legitimately, like they could be a team that's a 90-ish point team, and that might be 5th best in this division.
Yeah.
And they're going to have to play all those teams 4 times. So you could make
stupid playoff format. They have no shot.
You could make big improvements, and I think they will. And they're going to be a contender very soon. I know they also have some money, so there's a chance that there's a significant move made even to bring in a more veteran guy. But yeah, I think they're going to be an exciting team. It's going to be should be a fun rivalry to watch because for the Wild, especially assuming that Quinn Hughes stays here, this is a team that for the next 3 or 4 is going to be right there too. So I think we might be looking at 2 teams that are among the elite.
Yeah, this division is just getting stronger and stronger and stronger, especially with Utah coming. The line changes. What did you think of the changes? I will say I continue to get more and more impressed with McCarron. I think he is one of those players that can be really effective. He wins his battles. He wins his draws. I think he's proof positive that analytics experts from afar should watch actual games with their eyes and not just on computer screens. He to me, he's been, I'm not saying he was worth a 2nd-round pick, but I could tell you the Wild paid a 2nd-round pick because he was so coveted in the league.
Yeah, I mean, I think he fills a role the Wild needed. I don't think it's a coincidence that suddenly their faceoffs have taken off, and they're 4th in the league now over the last 6 games on the faceoff dot, where prior to that they were 31. And he's a part of it. Interesting that in Chicago they still were almost 60%. Now, granted, Chicago is the one team in the league that's worse than them on faceoffs, but still they won almost 60%. And that was without Eric Sinek in the lineup, who takes as many faceoffs as anybody in the league. So I don't think it's an accident they've gotten better. I think he's created some internal competition, both for faceoffs and for playing time and roles. I think there's a limit to what he can bring in terms of upside in your lineup. And so now to go back to the original point about the line juggling, I think that's what John Hines is going to have to figure out here down the stretch, is not just how do you want to start games, but what bullets do you have for changes within a game if you don't like the way things are going? It would be really hard for me to imagine a scenario where it's not best going into the playoffs with Ekboldi and Johansson playing together when you look at a matchup with either Nathan McKinnon and his line or Hinson Robertson or Johnston and Rantanen, whichever way you'd want to match up your best checking line. You're going to need those guys who have been the team's best line over the course of the season against the other team's best. I think I find it hard to believe that the best setup won't be with those three guys together. But you want to know, hey, if we're trying to come from behind, how does it look to put Vladimir Tarasenko in a spot with Hartman and Zuccarello like he's done here, like he did the other night at home against Toronto? How does it work to just put Tarasenko with, I know we've seen him at times with Kaprizov, maybe with Kaprizov and Urov, just different things like that you want to at least see here down the stretch to see how they might work, is there chemistry there? Is it a combo that you could go to in a specific spot where things aren't working well?
Yeah, I do want to talk to you about the GMs meetings in a little bit. Tarasenko, 3 goals in his last 2 games. I don't disagree with you about what the line matchups will be. I really do. I will be interested to see when Foligno comes back. Who comes out of the lineup if they're healthy? I mean, it really might be Bobby Brink.
Well, we talked about this last week, and I mean, just think about how quickly things can change because we were asked at our live show about who would be the guys out, and
all of a sudden,
right? But I mean, now I didn't think he was going to be the guy out, but at one point you had mentioned Tarasenko might be the guy that comes out, and now all of a sudden he's a guy who might be the guy you're going to in your top 6. I mean, so things change quickly, and I know that there's a knee-jerk reaction from fans. Team loses 3 in a row. Oh my God, you got to blow things up, and this guy can't play in this role. This guy can't play in that role.
It's not just fans. I mean, Bill Guerin also, when I sat down with him in Minnesota, in Florida for the GMs meetings, he was not happy, and he wanted to see urgency, and he didn't want the team to limp in the playoffs. And I think what he was trying to, cut off at the path was, last year they won 5 of the last 15 games, or 5 of 15 before they won a couple in a row. I remember the loss in Long Island looked like it was going to be putting the Wild in a position where they could maybe miss the playoffs.
It got tight, no doubt
about it. And I think
he's
trying to. I think he's seen this story before in March, and I think he probably maybe was over. I hate the word over exaggeration because it's redundant. It's yeah. But I think he was trying to. He probably was over exaggerating the situation and the panic level. He wasn't like in a panic, but I think what he was like immediately trying to let these guys know, don't do this again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I get that, and certainly nobody wants to see things get as tight as they did last year, and we actually were joking about that on our last road trip about the fact that last year I remember having the conversation so many times that with about 15 games left or 20 games left and saying, look, there is no way the Wild missed the playoffs. And they would have to go in the tank. These 2 or 3 teams would have to essentially win every game. And it's almost what happened.
Yeah.
The Wild went and they lost 9 in a row at one point, like 0-7-2 or 1-7-1 or something like that. Calgary almost went undefeated. St. Louis almost, and yet they still made the playoffs because it was
a miracle. Like if Eriksson Ek doesn't score that goal, they don't make the playoffs.
Who
knows who the freaking
right. And but it was it was almost as bad as it could possibly get, and they still made it, which is why all along I was saying there's no way 2 teams go 13-2. And then 2 teams did go 13-2.
Yeah, it was crazy. But you saw the stress level last year in Long Island when Billy Guerin came out of the locker room and called the referee a effing asshole.
Yeah,
which
I get it. There was, and I know that's what he. But I just I'll go back to when you step back and look at the 3 games they played here. Number one, I thought Philadelphia played really well, started well, and Minnesota was a little. They weren't sharp. But in none of the 3 games did it look like it was a team lacking effort or energy. A couple of those nights, they just couldn't make plays. And even in the Philadelphia game, if you remember, they hit 2 posts in the first period. Well, if those 2 pucks go in instead of hitting posts, now you're not even talking about it.
Right.
And you look at as I mentioned earlier, and I talked to John Hines about this in Chicago. And first of all, if you look at those games, the numbers and the chances actually weren't nearly as bad as what the overall feel of the games were, because of the fact that you were playing non-playoff teams.
Yeah.
They were, if you throw these 3 games at some other, like any other point during the season, maybe not 3 in a row, but yeah, this night against the Rangers, they got beat. Shesterkin was great. I thought Stolarz was great. Those things happen. And so it prompted me to start to do a little digging. I don't know if you saw the note. We had a graphic on it, but I also posted on Twitter that Minnesota, Colorado, and Dallas right now are 3 of the best 6 teams in the NHL. All of them have had this kind of a spot. Dallas lost 10 out of 12 games at one point this year. Mm-hmm. They went 2-6-4. 5 of those 12 games were against non-playoff teams. They got outscored by 11 goals in that stretch. Mm-hmm. Colorado had a 3-5-2. At this point, Minnesota was 3-4-2 over a 9-game stretch. 4 of the 9 were against non-playoff teams. They still had a plus goals. I mean, they all have them. And the Wild stretch wasn't as bad as what the other 2 did.
Yeah, but I will say, what was it? They, I think, won 2 or 3 of their last 11 at home against non-playoff teams. I think what Guerin is worried about is that there just seems to be this which is good that they get up for big games, because that's all you play in the playoffs. But there just seems to be this sort of slip back when it's either a team or when they just return home. Like, I think he wants to know what the heck's going on. Are they not getting enough rest? Like, there's a lot of things that I think he's trying to get to the bottom of.
Remember last year there was the same thing. They couldn't win at home for a while. They were talking about changing routines, switching morning skates to the game rink. And look, all of the things, like everybody that's in an organization or on a coaching staff, you never want to see things get away. So as soon as you see any blip, you want to study it. You want to look at it and say, is there more there than what we're seeing? And I just think in this case, there was less there than what was causing panic. It was 3 games where you outplayed 3 opponents and you lost all 3. You went 0-2-1. If it had been backward, if you flip those numbers around, and if the expected goals for were 65% for the other team over that 3-game stretch, then I'd say it was time to start. Hey, wait. We can't let this happen. But this was a spot where he outplayed 3 teams and just lost 3 games. And I think that was when I talked to John about it afterward, and you go back and you look at it and you rewatch it, and was there really something there that was missing? And there just wasn't. They just didn't score for 3 games.
Right.
If you look at the power play.
Don't you think, though, that you sometimes err on the side of coming up with a stat that supports your opinion? And Johansson's the one that I always think of. Like I could sit there, and maybe I do it too, but I could sit there and point out that he has 1 goal and 7 assists with 25 shots in 23 games, and you could point out, well, look at his points per 60, or
yes, yes and no.
By the way, are you going bowling after this?
No, just
those are nice white shoes.
Yeah, I like them actually. I just picked them up about a month ago or so. No, but I think that. I love how I changed the subject to get you off the. I look at a lot of things from a coaching perspective, and I know I've talked about it before, and I want to make sure people understand. I'm never trying to compare the level I coach to what these guys are coaching. But I coached high school football for 15 years. I coached Legion baseball for several years. You want to make sure as a coach you maintain some kind of an even keel. And I think I approach a lot of these spots from that perspective, where there are people that as soon as one game gets away or one guy has one bad night, just get him off that line. He can't be on that line. That's the problem. And I think you always have to be willing or able to look at things a little bit more with a little more calmness to it, to say, okay, that night might not have been his night, but what has he done over a month? What is he and in the case of Johansson, that's a lot of people's knee-jerk reaction is that, well, this guy's in the top 6. He's okay. So here's that's the reason I throw out some of those numbers is he's in the top 6, but he really, if you look at it, he doesn't play on the power play, or very little, a lot less than all the other top 6 guys. Those guys are all playing, like Vladimir Tarasenko, for example. has more than double the power play minutes that Johansson has this season. More than double. So he should have more points than Johansson, and yet he really doesn't. Their numbers are about the same. So I just look at it and say, top 6 minutes? Well, not really. He plays, his minutes total in games is about the same as Tarasenko. It's about the same as Trenyon. Those are the guys he's playing about the same number of minutes. He's playing 14 and a half. Tarasenko's about 14. Trenyon's like 1350. The guys in the top 6, Kaprizov, Eriksson, Boldy, Zuccarello, those guys are playing closer to 20 minutes a night. So he's in a top 6 role, but he's not playing top 6 minutes. He's really playing middle 6 at best, really third line minutes for the most part. He's been on a line where he's playing against the other team's best most of the year. Tarasenko's not, Zuccarello's not, Hartman's not for the most part over the course of the year. So I think you have to keep all those things in mind. There's a reason why the Wild wanted to sign him. Everybody on their staff knew that this is a guy that makes every line he plays on better. And so then I threw out the even strength. If you look at just what he does at even strength, which is comparing more apples to apples because you're eliminating power play points, even strength points per minute, Boldy is the only player on the team who scores more than he does. He scores more than Eriksson Ek, who's on his line. He scores more than Kaprizov at even strength per 60. So, and I say all this, you and I talked before the season. I like the Johansson signing because it was less than $1 million. I like Johansson in your lineup if he's on your third line. He is not a second line winger, in my opinion. But on this line, on this roster, in this lineup, who's better?
Right.
That's all I argue is that I think in an ideal world, John Hines and Bill Guerin would tell you when they set up their roster this year, they were hoping Marcus Johansson would be a third or even fourth line winger with the potential to move up in the lineup if somebody got hurt. The way things played out.
By the way, the third line is the tonic for players because Bobby Brink couldn't do anything on the second line. He goes to the third line, scores the huge goal with a shoulder injury.
Right.
And then Tarasenko, Johansson goes down there. He gets a 3-point night.
And all of that might be, but remember, they tried Tarasenko in a top 6 role early in the season and wasn't producing.
I think long-term in the playoffs, you're right that Johansson's probably going to have to be in that position. And then if you have times where you have to like quickly make a change, you throw Tarasenko.
And now I think what you've already seen is, okay, if we're chasing in a game and you want to put Kaprizov and Boldy together, you can do that with Eriksson Ek because you've now seen a little bit of magic with Hartman, Zuccarello, Tarasenko.
Right.
Where now if you need 2 lines to try to generate offense rather than control the flow of the game.
I do think that one thing that you are forgetting is that on JoJo offensively and the points per 60 is that this is still a regression to the mean. He's just become the player that he's always been. He had an unbelievable first half of the season. And then ever since before last night, 8 points in his last 23.
But that's exactly what I've said about him all year, is that he's never going to be. He was a 58-point scorer once, but my point has been he's never going to be. If you wanted him to be if you thought because he's playing on the second line, he's suddenly going to be a 20-goal, 60-point guy, he's not.
Yeah.
This is what he is every year. 12 to 15 goals, 40 to 48 points, and for less than $1 million, that is about as good a signing as you're going to find.
But it is just shocking that you could have that type of start to the season and then you just become Johansson. But I think that's what frustrates fans.
But it's like baseball players. Yeah. I don't care if a guy's hitting 210 in May. If he's a 260 career hitter, you look by the end of the year, he's going to be hitting somewhere between 255 and 265. Guys hit what they're going to hit. Guys score what they're going to score. And this is what Johansson is. And so then I'd go beyond the numbers to say, going back to a point you made earlier, that there's an eye test element. When I talk to John Hines about him, and this is when we have off-the-record talks, and sometimes his name comes up every once in a while. He's not the most frequent player we talk about because his game is pretty consistent. But he will always be quick to point out his game is so much better than what the general fan realizes. The number of plays he shuts down with his skating defensively is he makes every line better, and every guy inside that room wants to have him on their line because of the responsible game that he plays and what he allows other guys to do. Those things aren't statistically quantifiable, But that's what he brings to a line that none of these other alternatives, because that would, to come all the way back around, that's the point. If you don't want him in your top 6, who in this lineup has earned a spot in the top 6 over the course of the year?
Yeah.
And I'd argue that there isn't a guy that from start to finish has produced more. Tarasenko would be just as streaky as Johansson.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, he has 3 goals in the last 2. He had a stretch earlier this year where I think it was right when he got thrown together with the Russian line and scored like 7 points or 8 points in a 3 or 4 game stretch. Well, prior to that, he had like 2 points in 12.
Yeah.
And so all of these guys are in that same spot. And the difference with Johansson is he brings more other parts of the game that help stabilize a line than any of Yurov, Trenyan, Tarasenko, Hartman, and now Brink potentially. These are all the guys that would be your alternatives in the top 6. I got to see more with Brink. When Johansson was out, remember, he got the first crack with Boldy and Eriksson Ek to see, could this be the top 6 guy in the spot where maybe you're chasing a game? And maybe he still will. So now if you're Hines, you're saying, okay, I got 2 options. I either can keep Hartman with Zuccarello and Kaprizov, throw Brink on a line with Boldy and Ek, or throw Tarasenko on a line with Boldy and Ek, or I could go Eriksson Ek with Boldy and Kaprizov and now go Hartman, Zuccarello, Tarasenko. I think that's what the benefit of having a playoff spot secured, not mathematically, I get it, but realistically, everybody knows the Wild are going to be in. Now you can use these games to experiment with some of that and see what might be your go-to change within a game if you need something.
No, that's a great point. When we come back, I want to talk to you about the GMs meetings. I want to talk to you about the news over at the University of Minnesota the last couple of days with the dismissals. We'll call it dismissals of Bob Motzko and Brad Frost. And there are a couple other things I want to talk to you. I did want to point out the passing of Jay Grossman, longtime agent. I've known him since the 90s. Was always a great guy to talk to, a gentleman. He was Wes Walz's agent at the end of his career, and I know Wes had a great appreciation for Jay. Really sad loss yesterday to cancer. We'll be right back on Worst Seats in the House.
Deer hunting season is here, and it's time to own your odds with OnX Hunt, the GPS hunting app trusted by millions of hunters. With the Hunt app, you'll have access to nationwide public and private land ownership information, waypoints, tracks, and much more, all at your fingertips. Go to onxmaps.com/hunt. That's onxmaps.com/hunt to sign up today.
At Royal Credit Union, we believe in banking with purpose. That's why we're here for you and your community with people-first service, local support, and all the accounts and loans you need to help reach your financial goals. As a not-for-profit cooperative, everything we do benefits the people and communities we serve, because Royal isn't just where you bank, it's where you belong. Experience the Royal Credit Union difference and learn more at rcu.org/royal support. Insured by NCUA. Loans subject to credit approval. Equal credit opportunity.
Things break unexpectedly, HVAC, plumbing, electrical, and when it does, most homeowners don't know which company to call first. That's why Aquarius Home Services is perfect. It simplifies everything with one call for all major home systems. Their experts handle everything across heating, cooling, plumbing, and electrical. And right now, for any repair, you could save $98 by calling Aquarius Home Services. Again, for any repair, you could save $98. Reach out and they will have a fast response and, trust me, professional service. In fact, ask about their maintenance plans so you could avoid these repairs. Last week on the same morning, I had Brock and Zach over here. One was doing my spring HVAC tune-up. The other was doing my Connecticut water tune-up. 2 visits on one morning. It was like Grand Central Station. Aquarius is locally owned, trusted across Twin Cities and Wisconsin, and they eliminate juggling multiple contractors. One call and your problem is solved. So right now, you can book your service at aquariushomeservices.com. Aquarius, earning the right to be recommended. And don't forget to tell them Russo sent you. Back here, Worst Seats in the House, Mike Russo, Anthony LaPanta. Big news over at the University of Minnesota the last couple of days. One day after Brad Frost lost his job, Bob Motzko, news is that he's not going to be returning after 8 years at the helm at the University of Minnesota. Obviously, he brought them to 5 NCAA tournaments, no national championships. I do think that he was very close to retiring anyway. Probably with 1 year left on his deal, this probably would have been his last hurrah next year. So maybe that's the only reason why the timing was a little different. Obviously, very disappointing year, 11 wins. And we don't have to, you could talk a little bit about Motzko because, I will say I didn't know him great, but always really good to deal with. Always, I remember when the Wild traded for Brock Faber, he was immediately on the phone with me. He's always been that way. But college sports now, it's so different. And I do think that last year almost proved it. Now with all these Canadian players coming over down here, NIL, transfer portal, like maybe that's where, the University of Minnesota didn't adjust. Maybe you need a younger guy. Maybe you need a general manager. It's going to be really fascinating where Mark Coyle goes with this hire now.
Yeah, and I don't really know anything about where he's headed. And I first, let's just talk about Bob. I've known Bob for a long time, back from when he was an assistant coach with Minnesota to when he was a head coach at St. Cloud. That was when I was involved with the Gopher hockey broadcast, both as a pre- and post-game host, but then also as a play-by-play guy. And Bob was one of the many in that league I had so much respect for a lot of those coaches, whether it was Dave Haxtell at North Dakota, Sandelin at Duluth, Saratori at Bemidji, Gwozdecki at Denver. I mean, there were just some high quality coaches in the league at that time, and Bob was one of them at St. Cloud State. And I've been a little more disconnected from the college game over the last few years just because schedules dictate that we don't see a lot of it. And when we're on the NHL circuit, you don't get a chance. And the game has, and when I say the game, not the game itself on the ice, but the game of building a roster has changed in college hockey. Change has always happened. I mean, for a long time, Minnesota had such a huge advantage from a recruiting standpoint because you were pulling players out of high school hockey in Minnesota. And for the most part, if Minnesota said they wanted you, they got you. Every kid wanted to play for Minnesota. Guys didn't go to St. Cloud or Duluth or even North Dakota very often if Minnesota had also offered them. But then the challenge for Minnesota was they got all these guys who were high draft picks who wanted to come straight to college hockey, and they were competing against guys who had gone to play a couple of years of juniors first. So Minnesota had advantages, but also challenges. And I think what you have to give Bob a lot of credit for is I was over there a couple of years after I had stopped doing games, and the change from the WCHA to the Big Ten had a little bit to do with it for sure. But the arena atmosphere was nowhere close to what it used to be, and he helped restore that. The building was buzzing again. It was full. It was exciting. It was loud. There was an excitement level about Gopher hockey that we hadn't seen for a few years, and he deserves a lot of the credit for rebuilding that. I know this year they knew that they had lost some people to graduation, but still had high expectations. The record might be misleading. I know they played the toughest schedule in all of college hockey, but Minnesota has incredibly high standards, and it's whether it's college hockey or pro hockey, you're in the business of winning, and they didn't win. So it didn't totally shock me that this happened. I felt the same way you did without having talked to him. You kind of got the feel that he might be winding down anyway. But I always hate to see guys like that not leave on a winning note, not leave on really, even though I know they said they mutually parted ways, it sure feels like it was the U telling him that now's the time to go. And I have a ton of respect for Bob, both as a coach and a person, and you always hate to see it end this way because I don't want him to leave being remembered for the guy that got run out of town because they went 11-22. I wish he'd be remembered as a guy that restored a roar inside Mariucci Arena.
Yeah, and obviously Brad Frost, very successful time at the U, won national championships. Maybe one day if Ken Clea leaves here, we'll see Frost coach the Frost. Who knows? It would be a perfect fit. What's your whole point? Your whole feeling on a general manager now? Doesn't it feel like college sports has just become though like pro sports, like where there's so much now. There's too much, it feels like, for a coach to deal with. Obviously, you deal with the recruiting and things like that, but with Canadian major junior players coming down and flooding the NCAAs now, and NIL money, and the transfer portal, and having to keep, it just feels like there needs to be. North Dakota, I believe, has a general manager.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at earlier, is that the landscape always changes.
Yeah.
And it changed to a point where teams felt like they had to get guys that were older guys to compete. Now it's to play, and I hate it. I hate what it's done to not just college hockey, but all college sports, where it's, guys jumping from team to team. I hate the fact that now when you see a guy, it lists 2 or 3 colleges for where he played. I remember watching the college football national championship game, and it was, instead of saying their hometown, it was what college they had when they're going through the starting lineup. It was, this guy came from Louisville, this guy came from Western Michigan, this guy, like, I hate that. I wish it was just wherever you go, just go. If you play, you're a Gopher, you're a Badger, you're a Bulldog, you're a Husky, whatever it might be. And I know why it was created, and the Wild have a perfect example in Charlie Stramel. I mean,
sometimes it's worked,
but but even for him to be in multiple spots, it just feels like that it's bad for college hockey. It might be good for some of the players, but
it'll be interesting what they do with the coach. Obviously, I think the Augustana coach Urban is going to be a huge candidate. Young, been on these top staffs. Just everybody seems to feel like they've already maybe even had contact. I think Grant Patolny would be probably the only job he'd leave for. There's a lot of great candidates out there. I think there's going to be a lot of people coming out of the woodwork for a job as prestigious as the University of Minnesota. I just came back from Manalapan yesterday, Palm Beach. Man, it was a long travel day getting back. Luckily, the GMs meeting was wrapped up early, but man, Palm Beach International was a zoo with all the issues nationwide with flights this week and all that. And then we hit crazy headwinds. We were delayed because of a sink issue. Typical. You know who was on my flight? Our mutual friends, Brian and Karen. In fact, they drove me home. And Brian came to dinner with Elliot Friedman, Lunani, and I the other night. So that was fun in Palm Beach.
But he had a lot to add.
Yeah, it was. He had a couple funny lines, but he mostly was mostly kind of a fly on the wall listening. But Brian and I were having some fun before the flight because I told him exactly what was going to happen. All right, they have a maintenance. First of all, we're delayed. They tell us we're 2 minutes late, even though the plane arrived at the time we were supposed to board. So of course that's not happening. Then of course
everybody would know when their plane arrived.
Yeah. So then all of a sudden, and Billy was on our flight too, and he looked like he was going to explode. Then they have a maintenance delay because the sinks are clogged. And I don't know how often, you probably don't fly a lot on regional jets, but I can't tell you how many times, like flying a regional jet, you go into the bathroom and there's wet naps on there because they have no running water. And I'm like, first of all, you could just do that. But I knew what was going to happen. So they spent 50 minutes trying to fix the sinks, couldn't do it. So we're delayed 50 minutes because of that. And then the end result was putting a bunch of wet naps in the bathroom. And I told Brian this is what was going to happen before, and so that delayed us an hour. Then we hit like the most ridiculous headwinds on the way back. So that was my.
You know what I do when they tell me my flight's delayed?
You go to sleep.
I sit in a chair and wait until they tell me the flight's about to leave.
I know. This was such an uncomfortable airport, though. Every seat full. It was just a zoo. All right. So the GM's meetings. Not a lot happened down there. Not a lot happened in the last 3 or 4 that I've been down there, other than it's FaceTime with the general managers. I did a really funny story that's going to run tomorrow on that rule that everybody unearthed last week, that technically that if referees don't or linesmen don't make it because of a misadventure, that they could have players do it. So that's a really funny story. Also, the genesis of the rule, whether or not they'd pull the trigger. I got a bunch of GMs on who they'd pick. So read that in tomorrow's Athletic. The reason why it's not run today is because the only time that we know that this happened in NHL history, what are the chances of this? But there was a 1983 game where a blizzard stopped Ron Fournier and Dan Maruelli from getting to the game on time. So 2 players acted as linesmen in the first period, but the referee that moved over from linesman, that was the only guy that made it on time, Ron Foyt, the Wild video goal judge.
Oh, wow.
So Ron doesn't even know this yet, but hopefully he's going to listen to this podcast. But the reason why the story didn't run is that the league gave me permission to talk to Ron tonight about his memories of this 1983 game where he worked it with 2 players.
Who were the players?
It was Vulcan and Gary Howitt. or Jerry Howitt. Gary or Jerry? I can't remember. I should know that. Tough little guy, as Coley Campbell remembered. So anyway, but this rule has actually been in the rule book since the 1928 rule book. So,
Wow.
So anyways, maybe a referee that was going by horseback to a game didn't make it on time, and they had to come up with some sort of way to get around it. The biggest thing down there was goalie interference, Anthony, and it does. You and I have a lot of respect for what they do in the Situation Room. And we feel like they do a great job. But I think, last year when at the GMs meetings, we were pulled into a room, the media, and we watched the same video that all the GMs got to watch. And the one thing that was clear coming out of that was that if you skate into the crease on your own volition and make contact with the goalie, that this is on you and the goal is going to be disallowed. Well, last week in Ottawa, Tim Stützle skates into the crease, hits Ville Husso's right skate and pad, and he doesn't make the save, and they allowed the goal. And it created a huge, huge issue. And it just does feel like the standard is slipping. And the reason why this is a huge issue is the playoffs are coming up. Like the penalty for being wrong on a coach's challenge is a power play. And now these video coaches, I think, have no idea what to do.
Yeah. Well, and I heard the explanation of that play was that they thought Husso had time to still recover.
That it didn't affect his ability to make the save.
His ability to make the save. And while I get it that that's legit, I also think that, and I've talked to goalies about this, that when they get clipped, people that haven't played the position don't realize how much that disrupts their ability to make the save, their ability to play their position. That some of them have said that it can throw you off enough where now you're off on your first angle, and even if you're now pushing across to the other side, just because you got derailed a little bit under a high pressure of a game situation, that it can affect you a lot longer than people that haven't played the position realize. And now clearly I'm talking to goaltenders, so they're trying to make sure that that it's more difficult than it comes across. But I also have there are goalies that then flop to try to make sure that any contact is, I'm going to make it look like this contact prohibited me from even staying on my feet, let alone playing the position. And you don't want to see it come to that either. So it's been an issue from the beginning because it's such a subjective thing. And I'll go back to when we were on one of the NHL broadcaster meetings, they did the same thing, did the same exercise, brought us in a room or showed some clips and said, okay, out of these 10, which ones were goalie interference? And they had shown them, they told us the stat, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but they had shown them to the 30 GMs at the time. And it was like the most unified they was like 20-10 on one of them. Yeah. So you think, okay, if they can't even watch it and all be in agreement, how do they expect guys doing the review to all be in agreement? Yeah. None of them were 30-0.
Yeah.
And everybody sees the same plays differently.
Yeah.
Even if it's not their team and they're seeing it from their perspective, they still look at the play and imagine seeing a play and having, 20 of the guys thought it was, 10 thought it wasn't.
Yeah.
Well, how do you expect the league to be 30?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. It was last year's one was interesting because it was almost completely uniform. The only one that everybody thought like, what are you doing? Was the one in Detroit where the Wild had the it was right. Lucas Raymond or I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, I remember.
It was a little ridiculous. Let's just talk quickly about playoff format because man, you think that sometimes I get you going on this subject. I got Gary Bettman going on this subject yesterday, and he basically admitted the dirty little secret out loud that it's about money, it's about eyeballs, and it's about that they feel like the first round you have the most eyeballs, the series is the most competitive, and it goes longer and it gets less and less. And the numbers show that in the conference finals under this format since 2013 are usually blowouts. They're usually uncompetitive. 5 games or less in 32% of those series. 41%, 6 or less. I think the issue that I have continued with this is that this format, like I think that you'd have eyeballs on the first round no matter the format you'd have. Because I think NHL fans are provincial. we see it in our numbers at The Athletic, because I cover all 4 rounds sometimes, or when the Wild are eliminated early, which, as we know, is often. So then I'll go and leave here and start doing 2nd, 3rd, and 4th rounds, and we see our numbers go down and down and down, because if you're a Wild fan, you probably don't care about reading the articles. You might be watching the games, but you don't read the articles from the Florida Edmonton series. You want to read about the Wild. You want to watch the Wild. And my issue here is that the format allows a situation now where Utah is going to get to play Anaheim most likely in the first round, a team that's going to be 25% less than, probably 25 points less than the 3rd team in our division, which is going to be the Wild. It just absolutely, to me, makes no sense. And my whole point on this whole rivalry BS is, if that was the case, then why, if the NHL was running the Olympics, they'd set it up for US and Canada to play in the quarters.
Well,
it just makes no sense to me.
And we've gone round and round on this, and I'm kind of
fatigued on it.
Well, I'm a little tired of it, only because this is the system. So everybody knew it coming in. Everybody knows it right now. And yes, there are examples.
But don't you think, just real thick on the system, don't you think Gary essentially admitted that the system is not for competitive balance and rivalries? It's money.
Well, but the rivalries are part of the money, because the rivalries are that's what draws fans in. That's what
I don't know. I think because it's so provincial, if the Wild were playing Seattle in the first round, everybody would still watch it.
But so this goes, I believe that the rivalries make it more intense. Mm-hmm. And the Wild fans know Dallas and Colorado a lot more than they know Seattle or Anaheim. And then when you bring those teams here next year to play their 2 games in St. Paul, there's more to it. The Dallas game on Saturday, it's going to be an absolutely packed house. There's nothing available for Saturday's game against Dallas. And I believe that's a part because you've built that rivalry up with playoff series and great division races. So that's number one. Number 2 is that I think
just real quick on that, on your point on that, next year, that if they play that, like, you're going to have the 2 games being packed. Don't you think that Craig Leopold, if his team loses in the first round, is going to be mostly ticked off that he doesn't get 2nd and 3rd round money?
No question about it. So I'm just explaining it from the devil's advocate side. Number 2 is that I know right now everybody looks at it and says, well, you got the best 3 teams in the league. To me, it's clear you have the best 3 teams in the West, and I've made this point before. I'll concede that. But it's a little bit of a misnomer, because the East is more balanced this year. So there are teams in the East who don't have the benefit of playing. 6 of the worst 7 teams in the NHL right now are in the West. Right. And the Wild and the Avs and the Stars get to play those teams either 3 or 4 times. The teams from the East only play them twice. So it's a little bit of an exaggeration to say the best 3 teams in the NHL. Concede it's the best 3 in the West, but it's not. When you look at the teams in the East, there's a whole bunch of teams that if you do the math and give them 2 more games against Vancouver and Calgary rather than against Ottawa, Buffalo, Detroit, those point numbers probably go up a little. I think the top 3 in the Central are among the top 6 in the NHL if you compared apples to apples. Right. But then the last point I would make is that almost every playoff system has its flaws, and it's in any league, in any tournament, and it's never going to be perfect. But this is an aberration that you don't see very often in the NHL.
I think, first of all, I don't think it's an aberration, because I think that, as you and I have talked about on this podcast,
it's an aberration if you go historically and look. It's never happened before. So that makes it an aberration.
Well, first of all, I mean, last year Dallas and Colorado had to play in the first round. We just talked about how the Central Division is just going to be on the rise right now.
It is.
And the reality is that you should not have a format that creates this aberration.
Right. But they've had this format in place since 2014. Mm-hmm. It has never happened that the best 3 in a conference were in the same division. Right. So that's why this is an aberration. That's the definition of an aberration. But just Anthony, doesn't happen. So, but let me finish the point about that. If you look at the playoff systems, and you brought up the Olympics, the Olympics are a perfect example. U.S. played Sweden in the first round. by any other measure, there's nobody that would have looked at that format. I had to go back and look to figure out how it happened.
Yeah.
That Sweden wound up being the sixth seed.
Yeah.
And it was because they finished third in their own pool.
Yeah.
They had a better record than the second place teams in other pools, but because they were third, they couldn't be seeded higher than a team that finished first or second.
But that was also an aberration because Jacob Markstrom dropped a goal. They actually had to pull the goalie
but I'm
with
saying
up two goals.
But it allowed it to happen, and it was, if anybody would have looked at it going in, was Sweden better than Slovakia? 100% they were. But yet the way that the thing happened, they wound up being a sixth seed.
In your eyes and Gary Bettman's eyes, you might as well have Canada and U.S. in the first round.
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying they won their pools, so therefore they couldn't play in the first round. And look at the NFL's setup, where a division winner gets guaranteed to be one of the top 4 seeds. Well, you win your division. To me, that means something. So I don't care if your division maybe compared to others is down. Those are the teams you play the most. You are the best in your division.
But if you play an 82-game schedule,
you haven't let me finish a point yet because you keep interrupting.
Anthony, if you play an 82-game schedule.
That doesn't mean that it's okay to interrupt if you just say my name. Michael,
Anthony.
If you win your division, you deserve to be seated there. Baseball does it. Football does it.
And if you are the top 3 teams in your conference, you shouldn't have the second and third best teams in the conference playing in the first round.
Right.
That's absolutely asinine.
Which has never happened before.
But the format allows for that.
Right.
And that's why this format is
once
stupid.
every 12
it's not
years.
Gonna be. First of all, this is going to continue to be an
we don't
issue.
know that for sure.
Anthony, if you play an 82-game schedule and you are in this league where everybody essentially plays a balanced schedule.
You don't. I'm so tired of hearing the balanced schedule. You play your division 4 times. You play the other 3.
You play some of your teams in your division 3 times.
You play 2 teams 3 times, right. And next year you're going to play them all 4. Next year you're going to play them all 4 times.
Right.
So this year, even this year, you play more games against your division teams than the other in the conference, and for sure than the East. So I'm just saying, those are the teams you play the most. Those are the teams you should be compared against. And look, I would love.
Anthony, this isn't like the 90s where you played 6 or 8 times. This is you were playing 2 teams in your division, the same number as the other conference. So it's essentially across the conference. I'm saying. So if you're playing the same division, you should not have a seeding that puts you back in a playoff format that allows Utah to play Anaheim. That's insane.
It's an aberration this year. I'll grant you that, and it's not. I don't.
Let me ask you: why does every single player, every single GM, every single fan think that you and Gary Bettman are wrong?
Not every single one does.
All right.
And I'm just saying that I'm just tired of hearing people complain about it because this is what it is. And everybody knew it. Everybody knows it. And look, I've listened to
it doesn't make it right.
I've listened to people.
It doesn't make it right. And Gary Bettman admitted yesterday it's because of money, not for your reason.
No, it's not. He didn't admit that. He
basically said it. He said because it's the most competitive and it goes the longest, which means more money.
And the
reality is that would be the same if it was 1 versus 8.
Is not right. You brought up the numbers and said in the conference finals, 41% of them go 6 games or less. Mm-hmm. Well, that 60% of them go 7 games. Not 60% of the first round series go 7 games. So
wait, say that again.
You quoted the stat. You said 41% of conference finals go 6 games or less.
Right.
That means 60%.
No, 41%
of them
are 6 games, 32. So 74% are 6 games or less. Only 27%
so 40% go 6 games.
Yeah, 41 are 6 games, 32 are 5 or less.
So 70% go 6 or 7.
Yeah. No, 73% go 6 or less games.
But 41 go 6 games, and 25
and 32 or 5,
and 25 go 7. So 67% go 6 games or more.
6 games or less.
41 go 6 games. 25 go 7 games. That's 66% that go 6 or 7 games.
No, 32% go 5 or less.
Right.
Okay, and 41 go 6 or less.
Right.
Right.
And 25 go 7.
27% of conference finals since 2013 have gone 7 games.
That's what I said, 25%. So 40% go 6 games and 25 go 7.
Yeah.
That's 67%.
I don't even know what you're talking about. All I know is you're wrong, and we're ending this freaking podcast.
Yeah, that's the way arguments are decided. Yeah. I believe you're wrong, so you're wrong. Look, I'm just saying, like, no matter what the format is, there'd be ways that somebody's going to end up where you're going to say that wasn't fair. And I've heard the same thing with 3-point games from people around here in years where the 3-point games hurt the Wild.
Well, all I know is that the public opinion don't agree with you.
Right. And every year,
if fans don't like this, that should actually count for the NHL.
It should count.
And somehow Gary Bettman has allowed, works for the owners, has convinced the owners that this process makes sense. And yet at the end of the day, either the Dallas owner or the Minnesota owner that spent a fortune this season to have a team that was the third best team in their conference or the second best team in their conference is going to be out for a ridiculous reason that only Gary Bettman agrees with and Anthony LaPanta.
Well, that is the end. There's others too. But my point is that we've heard people that have complained about it's impossible to make up ground because there's 3-point games everywhere. And well, this year that happens to be benefiting the Minnesota Wild. If you looked at just wins and losses, the Wild would be a team that would barely be in the top 10 in the league. But because they've lost so many games in overtime, they're there. Nobody's complaining about it because it's what the system is. It's what everybody knew the system was coming in. There have been years where it benefited Minnesota. There have been years where it hurt Minnesota. There have been years where Minnesota benefited from the current playoff format. And this year, they're going to face a tougher team in the first round than you would if you seeded it a different way, but there have been years where it's been the reverse too. And I just think this is what the system is. So figure out a way to win. It's going to be a great first round series, whether it's Dallas or Colorado against Minnesota. It's going to be a great series.
Yep.
And every year there are always a couple really good first round series. I've made the point before, most years when you look at the playoffs, I'd say you could peg 8 to 10 teams where you'd say they have a legit chance to win it, right? I mean, most years there's 4 or 5 in each conference that you could see making a run. And Minnesota's one of those 4 or 5 for sure in the West this year. But by definition, that means 2 of them at least and maybe a third are going to get knocked out in the first round every year. Good teams get beat. And that's what the playoffs are all about.
And those upsets would be okay if it was a 1 versus 8 system. But when you're having the second and third best,
is.
Well, by the way, Bill Guerin disagrees with you, so go have this debate with him. All right, that's the podcast. There wasn't really much else at the GMs meetings. The 19-year-old thing is going to be really interesting. Where it looks like some 19-year-olds are going to be in the AHL starting next season. Net guards come into play next season for players that have never played an NHL game. And the league will be enforcing to making sure that net guards and visors are on properly. That's something that needs to be, after the Olympics and watching the way these guys wore net guards, that has to be enforced. I did want to also point out that Nashville Predators scout David Westby passed away. He's local, huge.
He's a Wilmer guy, wasn't he?
And just brutal. And died of cancer. He worked for the Predators for a long, long time. Huge Vikings fan from St. Paul. And just wanted to send my best to his friends and family. Thanks to our incredible sponsors of Worst Seats in the House, Aquarius Home Services, your local authorized dealer for Connecticut water treatment systems, Royal Credit Union, and Onyx Maps. Thanks, everybody, and talk to you next week.
So much coming out, there's nothing.